Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Paige. I'm an addict, and what a privilege it is to be here and to be speaking on the 12th step. You know, the 12th step, genuinely, that's what we're after. Now, when I got here, that wasn't what I was after. I was kind of after a little bit of relief, and I was hoping I wasn't going to have to do the things that would get me to the 12th step. But that's what I was after. You see, the 12th step has three parts to it, as it's outlined on very top of page 60. And the first is a promise. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the promise because, well, I'll try to talk about it at the end, because the thrust of what I was asked to speak on was carrying the message and practicing these principles in all our affairs. But the 12th step kicks off with a promise, and the promise is that if I take this course of action, if I do this work, I will have a spiritual experience. I will have a spiritual awakening. It is promised to me, and that's some good news. Because you know what that means? That means that the 12 steps are addict proof. Because I think I can mess it up. I think I'm going to show up and I'm not going to get the thing and it's not going to happen to me. But if I take the course of action that is outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it is promised that I will have a spiritual awakening. I will have a spiritual experience. And that is what I need. Nothing less than that is what I need in order to recover from the illness of alcoholism or the illness of addiction. That's what I need. And it is available to me. And if it is available to me, what that means, it is available to each and every one of us. And that I'm not special. And that's good news. Now, the bad news is, how do I get that? Which is the 12 steps as outlined in this book. Oh, that's a whole lot of work. You're asking me to do these things that I don't want to do. But I want us to dive into the discussion of what does it look like to carry this message to another addict or alcoholic. What does that look like? You see, there's an interesting thing, is in the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, the word or phrase sponsor is not found. Now, some of you will be like, exactly, I don't got to do it. No. What I will say is the job description is all over the place. And here's what I know from experience. The most sure sign of a spiritual experience is the desire to go help somebody else. Now, immediately I'm going to meet us where we're at, which is if you're here today and you're like, well, I don't want to help people, therefore I haven't had one and I shouldn't do it. Absolutely not. That's not how we do. I have to take the action to get the results. And actually, while I'm talking about that, and I'll talk a little about how I have found to be effective for me in sponsoring. And I just want to be clear. Like, if I say something and you're like, well, I don't do it that way, or my sponsor doesn't do it that way, but what you're doing is working, disregard everything that I say. If what you're doing is working, do that. But you see, for a long time, I was doing what was kind of shown to me, and it wasn't working. People weren't getting well. They weren't sponsoring others. Of course, the old adage, but I was staying sober. Amazing, wonderful. But I want to be effective in this thing. And so I saw what wasn't working, and I saw where I was being called in my heart, and I started to do things that weren't done with me. And actually, I'm a little all over the place, but for example, I'm a line-by-line sort of gal. If we have the time to go line by line through the book, we're going to go line by line through the book. I've never had a sponsor take me through line by line. I'm also a daily sort of gal. You see, once a week, I always wanted to work with people more frequently. And again, if once a week is working for you, don't worry about it. You do what you do. If it's working, it's working, but it wasn't working for me. We'd lose momentum. It would take too long to get through the book. It would take too long to get through the work, and I would lose people. And I always felt in my heart that I wanted to work with them more rigorously. And when I started to work with people on a daily basis, they started to get well, stay well, and have the capacity to help others. You see, I'm a big believer in momentum. What I do builds momentum. And if I go after this thing quickly and thoroughly, it's easier to continue to do it. But Actually, I'm sure you guys all know what it's like to get a little drunk or use a little drugs. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And if you were to give me a hoot of crack cocaine, and then I had to wait a week before I could get another hoot, oh man, oh, you know what I mean? Have 3 drinks and then wait a week till you get 3 more drinks? I'm not gonna get the effect. And it's like that with the 12 steps. I'm after an effect. I'm not after an idea. I'm not after an opinion. I'm after an experience, and I've got to go after it. So I work with people on a daily basis. And there's sometimes I work with people and we don't have the time to go through the book line by line. And when we go on a daily basis, we'll get through step 1 in like a week or 2, like a week. But if I'm working with somebody and they can't make it a week, we got to go faster than that. I'll just be transparent so all of you can get resentments real quick. And then you can write them down and share them with me in the Q&A portion. But I will take complaints in the form of 4-column inventory or carrier pigeon. That's the only way I take them. So if that's how you're not giving it, I don't want it. Now, what I also do is when I work with my sponsees, I sit with them as they do step 4. You know why? Because it gets it done. It gets it done well and thoroughly and in depth. And it helps the process. And guess what? And I've never had a sponsor sit with me as I do step 4. And guess what? When we do step 9, I'll sit with them as we write out how we can make the amends and as we make the approaches together. I've never had a sponsor ever do that with me. But again, I do it because it is effective. And you know what else I did? I smoked a lot of crack. Well, maybe not a lot, but enough to end me up here. You know what I'm saying? I drank a lot. I popped a lot of pills. Why? Because it was effective. I was after the effect. And I'm like that here. I need the relief and the release of the spiritual experience. And just as much as when I made that 3rd step decision, I decided that I was no longer in charge of my life. And I decided that I was going to work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. And in so doing, I have a responsibility to that power which is greater than me. And I have a responsibility to the addict or alcoholic who is suffering from this illness. And I want to be effective. So I didn't plan on going on that tangent that long, but that's kind of how things go with me. Let's pop over. I just want to take us to page 18. Because in parts of the world, on page 18, what we'll go into is what is called the sponsorship contract. It's part of Canada where I picked this up. And it's this idea of who do I need to be in sponsorship. And you'll notice page 18, we're in there is a solution. That's like some step 1 stuff. And already in step 1, I mean, from some of the earliest pages in our book, it talks about it. It doesn't say the word sponsor. But it's got the job description all over it. How I need to show up to work with others. The sponsoring, even if the word's not there, is a part of this thing. I've got to work with others. I've got to. I'm not saying you have to, but the illness that I have demands treatment. It demands treatment. And I need to treat it with nothing less than a spiritual awakening. And I need to help others have that same experience. So page 18, let's start with the italics. And actually, we read some of it at the start of this meeting. So it says, but the ex-problem drinker, the ex-problem crackhead, the ex-problem addict who has found this solution. What is the solution we have? A spiritual experience that happens as the result of these 12 steps. So I've got to take the action. I've got to actually do it, which is rude because I'd rather not, but I've got to take the actions of the steps, have this experience to share. So who has found the solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself. What does that mean? Because we'll say it, but what does that mean? And what that means is that I can tell you from my own experience what it is like to have the allergy of the body, what it is like once I start to use, and how that goes. And how I burn my life to the ground and I can't stop. And I can share with you from my own lived practical experience what it is like to have the obsession of the mind. When I'm like, girl, I'm never going to do that again. only to have a thought happen a day, a week, a month, several months down the line that says this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I just got to get it out of my system. My problem with smoking crack with Canadians, but we're over in the UK. You guys do that pinkies up, right? That sort of this time will be different. Can I share with that from my own experience? And here's what I found. When we talk about facts about ourselves, that is vitally important. But there are times when the addict who still suffers has had a bit of clean time, a little bit of separation, and they are miserable. Or maybe they've had the magic happen and they've stopped doing the work. Not you guys, but it's, other people have stopped doing the work and they're riddled with self. They're wrapped up in the bondage of self. And that doesn't, and by the way, wrapped up in the bondage of self doesn't look like that's what it is. It looks like everyone's doing everything wrong. That's what it looks like. And they need to do it right, but they are suffering and in pain. And it can be helpful for me to share my lived experience. Even though it is not diagnostic, it is what we treat. My lived experience with what it is like to live with the spiritual malady. My lived experience of what it is like to live with that sense of separateness from God, the restless, irritable discontent, my lived experience with the bedevilments. But just as much as those, I need to be able to be armed with facts about myself as it pertains to inventory and amends. You see, in my experience, it does no good if I'm like, go write some inventory, but I don't know how to do it. And the more that I take my own inventory, the more that I am honing my skills and my abilities and developing deeper facts about myself that I can use to help another person. Because that is my responsibility, and that is what I decided in the third step. So that person who has found the solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be done for him. There is power in the gift of identification, in the gift that, man, you've been where I've been. You've done what I've done. You've felt what I've felt. You're not talking out of your butt. I was going to say Paduski, and I'm like, that's not even a word, but I'm trying to avoid swearing. So that's the language you get. I'm not pulling it out of where the smoke blows. You know what I mean? This is my lived experience. And there's something that happens when it's like, man, you're like me. But you're not like me today. You're a living example of a power. There is a light on in your eyes. There's a hope in your spirit. Man, you are not miserable. You don't have the thought to get loaded like that. That's who I am called to be. And we'll talk about that here in a sec. And so it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And it says that the man who is making the approach, that is important. I need to approach them. I've been doing this thing for a while. And I will tell you, I've put my number on meeting lists. I've put my number in the chat. And you know what? I will get a call a year. You typically, on average, about one call a year off a meeting list, off putting my number in the chat. It's not effective. That's not effective. In 2025, I can show up to this meeting. I don't even got to put pants on. I promise I'm wearing pants. MJ didn't tell me I had to, but I said I would. I didn't. But I am wearing pants. But it is so easy. The least that I can do is get their number and reach out to them. Get their number, reach out to them. Because that is far more effective. So I need to make the approach. That's what I'm called to do. I got to seek these people. I got to try to help them. My life depends on it. So that the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty. I've been where you've been. I've done what you've done. I've experienced what you've experienced. That he obviously knows what he is talking about. Not just memorizing facts and figures, but that my lived experience demonstrates this change. And that it says that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. We talk about that word deportment. That means my conduct or my behavior, which is good news because it means I don't have to wear a suit and tie. Because I'm not in for the, actually fancy dress means something different in the UK. But I'm not here to get that fancy. It is how I carry myself. That the way in which I carry myself demonstrates to you that I'm not full of it. demonstrates to you that I have found a real answer, which has allowed me to experience a change. And that is what is doing the shouting. Now, I talk with some enthusiasm. I know, I've been told. But I'm not here to shout at anyone. And back in the day, I used to joke. I got my big book hardcover so I could beat the willingness. We don't hit anyone. We use our words in Cocaine Anonymous. But that idea that who I am and how I carry myself, how I treat people, that is what is demonstrating. So shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. And that's what we've got here. We've got an answer. We've got a solution. It's not maybe, could be, it might happen. We have an answer. If you are here today and you're coming back, if you're here today and you're brand new, if you're here today and you're in and out and in and out and in and out, and you call yourself a chronic relapser and you don't know why you can't get it, or if you're here today and the magic is gone, the magic that you had before is gone and you're miserable and you hate everyone, including yourself, what I want you to know is that here in Cocaine Anonymous, we have a solution. We have an answer. We have a way out that works. And just as important, it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to take this course of action, and it does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. That is a message of hope. It goes on to say that he has no attitude of holier than thou. We are, this might sound a little familiar, shoulder to shoulder in this thing. That we are walking, moving, taking this course of action, experiencing true humility. I'm no better than a sponsee, and I'm no worse than my sponsor. I'm walking along the spiritual path, and my responsibility to those that are newer is to help them find the solution that I've found. Nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. There are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. But if you spend some time with me, you might have to endure a tangent or two. And it says those are the conditions we've found most effective. And again, that is what I am called to be, effective. So if I'm working with others, I can ask myself, is what I am doing effective? And if not, I can go back to the directions in the book and have a look at how I can be more effective. So one of the things that I've done is when you go into the chapter working with others, it gives you, it's like directions that are like a flow chart. It really is, if this, then this, if not this, do this. And I'll put it in the chat after. But I actually physically made a flow chart on how to work with others based on those directions. And the first thing is I got to find somebody to work with. Where do I find sponsees? Well, in 1939, it was a lot more difficult. In 1939, or even there are people who are in remote communities where there is not a meeting. I was just chatting with a sponsee who's out up in northern Canada, in the very, very remote, and there is no in-person meetings. There's a huge amount of this illness, and I'm like, what a beautiful opportunity to kind of have some old school 12-step calls. But how do I find people to work with? Well, the most easy way is to come to a meeting, and that becomes my purpose. Into coming to a meeting to find who can I help, how can I serve, and that changes it. And one of the most effective ways is to go and talk about the solution, because people that are looking for the solution will hear it. And I don't just mean the words that we say, but how we say them, how we live them. Go and share on the solution, and go reach out to the newcomer, get their number, that sort of thing. That's the easy part. But there are other ways. We have hospitals and institutions get involved. We have phone monitoring, phone lists. We have at this meeting the sponsorship coordinating. Got it. That's ways that we can get involved to find somebody to work with. Then what do? We find as much information about them as we can. So that introductory conversation. Like, why are you here? Like, what's been going on? And what do I want to find out? Well, I want to find out, have they been to 12-step before? Have they been to rehab before? What's their experience been like? Have they had a sponsor? Tell me about that. I also want to get a sense of, like, where are they with a higher power? Are they closed? Do they have religious trauma? Are they open? I want to get some information about that. I also want to see, what does their cycle look like? What I mean by that is I want to see how long do they have in between relapses, because that's going to tell me how quickly I need to move with them. If they can't make it a week, we've got to go. And we got to do step 1, 2, 3 and dive into 4 through 9 quickly and thoroughly. And we can go back and read line by line after. If they've got 30 days in between relapses, we have a little bit more time to work. This is information that I need to know to see how I can be helpful. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to give any direction on that, but it can be helpful to know if there's outside issues, medication, that sort of thing, so that I know what's going on if there's a sudden change in behavior. Just so I get that information, how can I be helpful, right? And so I want to have that introductory conversation, and in that I can explain some things. I can explain how I work with people. A lot of times there's misconceptions about what sponsorship is. If you want to call and vent about your problems, I'm not that girl. I'm not it. If you want a once a week sponsor, I'm not that girl. And that's okay. That's okay, but it's not me. But to explain that my responsibility is to take whoever is before me through these 12 steps to allow them to have a spiritual awakening. I've also found it very important to have a conversation early on about keeping appointments. I'm sure nobody else who's worked with others has experienced this. I know it's just me. But for a long time, I would have people that would no-show, that would be late, that would reschedule. And I would get so resentful. And this was a lot of times before COVID. So I would be meeting people in person. So I'd be wheeling through the snow and sitting at a coffee shop. And here's my experience. It was never the first appointment. It was never the last appointment. It was one of the middle appointments. So I couldn't leave. I was stuck there. And I'd just be like, oh. And so what I learned was to have that conversation. To have that conversation about, keeping appointments. That's what I ask. I actually stole this from somebody who became a sponsee of mine, and it's always a privilege to help. But respect my time and match my effort. That's what I'm going to ask. And here's the thing. If I'm rescheduling appointments, if I'm no-showing appointments, what that means is that recovery is not a priority. Because I don't no-show something that's a priority. I don't reschedule priorities. If I'm making recovery a priority, I'm keeping those appointments. And I'll share this with you. In my experience, and I have a lot of experience working with a whole lot of people, and that's another thing. If you want to get good, not that it's a good or bad, but if I want to become more effective in sponsoring, I do that through sponsoring. I do it through doing it. I've worked with so many people, and what I have found is any person who made a habit out of canceling, rescheduling, or anyone that no-showed, not a single one of them stayed sober. Not a single one. And I started having that conversation where it's like, I'm going to give you this information, and you're going to make whatever decision you want to make. But here's my experience. And that sort of lays down that framework, because that's important. And then in the book, it talks about laying down the information about steps 1, steps 2, and step 3. Explaining, what does it mean to have the allergy? What does it mean to have the obsession? And going through that from my own lived experience. And like, if we're willing to go, we go. And then talking about step 2. Could I believe that there could be a power that could take the obsession to use, to drink, to smoke, to pop pills, to engage in whatever behavior it is? Is there a power that's bigger than that? If yes, amazing. And then the third step is a decision. Am I willing to do this work as a way of life? Like my life depends on it, because it does. And here's the thing. My job in Cocaine Anonymous is not to make somebody willing. That's not my job. That's not my responsibility. Unfortunately, that is the responsibility of the illness of addiction, the pain and the suffering. But my responsibility is to identify when a window of willingness has opened up. I'm not a big believer in bottoms because we kind of act like I'll hit bottom and then I'll stay sober forever. And that's not how addiction works. But what happens is I will burn my life to the ground where I get in so much pain that I'm willing to do things I was not previously willing to do. Now, if you've been around this thing before, you'll see this in yourself and you'll see this with the people you work with. Why I work with a sense of urgency is because that window will always close. It will always close. And you can tell what it looks like. It looks like that slow drift away, not keeping appointments. I don't need to do this. Now I got to get focused on a job. And it's a drift away. And what is inevitable is that I will relapse. So I got to move within those windows of willingness. And I got to move quickly. That's just been my experience based on what I have found to be effective. Because that's what I want to be. I want to be effective in helping others. And again, not just in helping them. Because my responsibility to my sponsees is not just to bring them through the steps so that they have a spiritual awakening. It is that. But it is also so that they can do that for others. And the line by line is what I found to be effective in that. But again, sometimes we don't have that time. Now, I didn't do a good job of managing my time. Spoiler, or not spoiler, shocking, Paige. Not managing time very well? What? Again, complaints, I will take them in 4-column inventory or carrier pigeon, and that's it. Now, I want to talk about practicing these principles in all our affairs. What are the principles? Now, I'm going to say something that's a little bit, but not really, that controversial. For me, the principles are not the nebulous concepts behind the steps. For me, it is not honesty or faith or hope or integrity or brotherly love. For me, the principles are the tangible actions of the 12 steps. And those are things that I can practice. And the more that I am disciplined in this way of life, the more I'm disciplined in prayer, the more I'm disciplined in meditation, the more I'm disciplined in the 10th step, in the 11th step, the more I'm disciplined in my own inventory, in my own amends, in my own actions, the more I am able to help you. And one of the things that I've found and is just with sponsoring is a lot of times when we're nervous to sponsor, we're nervous of steps 4 through 9. And we can subconsciously try to slow our sponsee down because we're afraid of how we're going to help them. And you might not, I've seen that. I've seen that in myself. I've seen that in others. That might not be your experience. But what I found is the more that I get that experience, the more I have experience to share and the more adept I am at taking people through 4 through 9 and my own 4 through 9. So I'm practicing these principles in all my affairs, in all areas of my life, not just so that I have a life, not just so I stay sober, not just so that I can continue to grow the spiritual awakening, but so that I can help others, so that I can be more useful in working with others. And so I didn't leave a lot of time to talk about the spiritual experience. But anytime in this book we see a promise, and there's promises all over this book, those promises are evidence of a spiritual awakening. And this is a book of mirrors. So what I can do is I can hold up this book to my lived experience. Of course, with the illness that is addiction, but I can hold it up to my lived experience with the promises, with the sneaky descriptions of a spiritual experience. And I can ask myself, is this my lived experience? And if it's not, that's okay. That just tells us we have more to do. And the directions are here. So what I will end on is if you've not had this experience yet, if you're feeling unsure of how to work with others, if you're feeling like you're just drowning, you're struggling, what I want you to know is that we have a solution, and that is our responsibility to help you find it. So please allow us to help you. Thank you for the opportunity to share.